In this video, we're going to look at many-to-many relationships, and really all we need to do a many-to-many is basically understand the basics of aggregation pipelines and lookups. Once we have that, we can technically set up many-to-many relationships. So we are going to need to switch around our database. So I'm going to have a students and classes relationship here. So we're going to insert some commands. So db.students.insert many. We've got about 8 students here. And so this code should be available to you somewhere nearby in the video. So go ahead and find it, and we'll add these to our database. And so I'm currently on my app. So I'm going to say use MTM example. So stands for many to many. So use MTM example. And then in here, I'm going to insert the many students. Okay, so I hit enter, and that added the students. And so now we need the classes. So there's another command here where we can add a bunch of classes. We've got about 7 classes. I'm going to paste that in. Enter. Okay. And then now, just like with SQL, if you've seen those videos or if you understand SQL, we have in SQL you have a students underscore classes, or you have a join table where you're joining both of the tables together with the IDs of the relationships that you want. So between students and classes, you would have a student ID and a class ID. So we call this table students underscore classes. So this is our join table, and this is just one way to do it in Mongo. So I'm going to copy all of these, which gives us about 24 different relationships. So I'm going to copy that and paste it in here. Enter. Okay, so we have our relationships. And now if we look at our data, we can see that we have all of the tables. And it takes, MongoDB is kind of slow, or at least the website is right now. So I'm going to just look at our table here in the code. So we have student ID and class ID in our join table. And then we have the DB for classes. So for example, ID of 1 is Miss Tilson, who teaches physics. And then and then here in the students, you have ID of 1, his name is Joe, and then the degree that he's taking is physics. And then we've got a business student, a math student, etc. And so these, you can tell which classes each student is in by the join table. So the student ID of 1, I think, is Joe. He is in the class ID of 1. So class ID is Ms. Tilson. So you can kind of see how that relationship plays out. And we can use our MongoDB commands to join all of these tables together pretty simply, basically just with lookups. So let's go ahead and set this up. So just like in the last video, if you watched that, we had a lookup. So I'm going to start with the students table, and then I'm going to join it onto the students classes table. So db.students.aggregate, and then our array, and then we only have one stage in this pipeline so far, so we're just going to do the lookup for now. So oops, and then we also need to put our stage in an object. So there we go, and then now we can run our lookup. So lookup, colon, and then we had from, local field, foreign field, and then as, which is what you want it to be, or what you want to rename this new object to be, or this new field. So students.aggregate, and so we're connecting the students to the students classes table. So the from field would be students underscore classes. Okay. And then the local field is going to be what? Our local field, or our local table. Our local field refers to the students table. And so if we look at our students table, we get an underscore ID. And so that's going to be the local field. So underscore ID. So local field is quotation marks underscore ID. And then the next one is the foreign field. And the foreign field is on the students underscore classes table. So if the local field is students, then the foreign field is going to be the student ID, because we're trying to connect the student's ID to the student ID, we're trying to connect the student's ID from the students table to the student ID in the students classes table. So the foreign field is going to be student underscore ID. So, comma. And then we're going to, so if there's a match between the student ID and the students classes table and the student's ID field, then it will take this object, or the matching object here in the students classes table, and put it in the new field that we create with the as. And so I'm going to call it class underscore IDs. So class underscore IDs, there we go. So we're going to have a new field called class IDs, which is going to be a list of the matches on the students underscore classes. So this should actually be enough. So let's go ahead and copy this and paste it into MongoDB Compass. So paste, and then enter, and now we get each student and a list of matches for that specific student on the students underscore classes table, which has all of the class IDs that student has. So we can see basically all of the classes that each student is taking based on the class ID of this new class IDs field. So once we have this class IDs field, then we can just run another join to get all of the classes. So because we have right now, we have just the class ID. But if we want the class info, then we have to do another join or another lookup. So basically all we're going to do to create this many-to-many is just do two lookups together, or two lookups one after the other. So we have our first lookup, and now we can focus on our second one. So after this lookup, then we just basically do another one, only this time we have access to this class IDs field. So we can just look up and then match on the class ID of the students underscore classes table or result set that's in the returned value of this lookup. So hopefully that makes sense, because this lookup returns a new document with a class IDs array of objects, and so now we're matching the classes table on the class ID that is in the class IDs table. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, just play around with it. So what we're going to do is another lookup. So we have our object here for this stage, and then lookup colon, and then here's our definition of this lookup. And so this time we're going to join onto the classes table. So classes, and then the local field is going to be class underscore IDs dot class ID. And we get that from the MongoDB Compass. Here we have our class underscore IDs dot class ID. And so we're going to match the class IDs dot class ID to the classes tables ID. And that's how we're going to get the information about that each class stored with the student that belongs to that class. So let's go back to our code here. And so we're going to say the local field is class underscore IDs dot class underscore ID. Okay, and then the foreign field is going to be on the classes table. So foreign field, colon, and then the classes table doesn't have a class ID. It has a underscore ID. So that's going to be the foreign field. So foreign field is underscore ID. Okay, and then basically we just have to name that field. So anytime there's a match, it's going to take the class, so the ID, teacher, and title, and it's going to store it in a field that we name, that we choose the name of. And so we choose the name with the as key value pair. So foreign field, and then after that, as. And so we're going to call this as current underscore classes. Okay, and so that should be everything. So this is our entire aggregation. We first join the students table to the students classes, and then we spit out a class IDs array. And then we take each of those class IDs and match them to the classes table. And not just the classes table, but the ID of the classes table. So we match the join table to the classes. And that's how we get all of the students' classes data. So I'm going to copy that, paste it in here, enter. And now we get this crazy thing here. So we get the class IDs of the student. So Mason is in the class IDs of 6, 7, and 3. And so then now we get 6, 7, and 3, but we also get the class data here. And so this is in our current classes. So we can see that Mason is in math, welding, and yoga. And so these are the teachers, here's the titles of the class, and here's the ID of the class. And so each student, we're able to get all of the classes and all of the class IDs and all of the details of those classes in one single query. And so this is a many-to-many relationship. I know it's kind of confusing, but you just got to play around with it.